This is a more practical partnering for resources session. We have two great speakers. I want to invite the speakers to come here. Okay, folks, let's get back. Are you okay here? I think water.
It's great. I hope you do it.
Okay, it's good to see all this discussion going. And now we are shifting gear a little bit from a sort of very scientific perspective of the ocean, right? Now we are going to get much more practical, right? And as we all know, any translational activity, entrepreneurial activity requires resources. And that's the major challenge. How do you marshal these resources? And there are many ways to do it. This morning we've talked about non-dilutive grants like SBIR and R01, things that you know about. Those are always the first stop. But from my experience, I can tell you SBIRs have become a lot more competitive. It used to be that 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's pretty automatic, especially somebody from UCSD writes an SBIR, they're going to get it, right? But now, everyone in the world knows, and like as we discussed this morning, even VCs expect you to have SBIR. So all startups are, writing SBIRs. And SBIR is also not a lot of money. Life sciences translation takes a lot of money. So that's where our two experts today for this afternoon are come in, right? So this session, we have two gentlemen here. Very pleased to introduce them to you. First is Ariel Feldstein, who some of you know here because he's been here on campus, UCSD. He's had a great career, actually. He's been a faculty member at UCSD, and then from time to time, he works in the industry and then comes back and does faculty. And now he's again the period where he's in the industry. He's at Novo Nordisk as the vice president. And he's going to share with us some of the partnering work Novo Nordisk is doing. And I can tell you they're doing a lot more on the East Coast in Boston. And one of our goals here is to at least match Boston, if not exceed Boston, right? So that's why I want to bring Ariel here, because he's going to help us become Boston, right? So that's number one. And our second speaker is Emir Sadhu, who's just flown in this morning from San Francisco. And thankfully, we have a beautiful day here, not the rainy day like we had 2-3 days ago. And he represents a company called Sandbox Ventures, okay? It's a very interesting venture capital company that I came to know about over the last 3-4 months. So I want all of us to get to know about them. So that he's going to talk second, and as always, we're going to have a Q&A after that. So let me invite Ariel first to talk.
Perfect, thanks. Thanks, Luis. Thanks for the invitation. It's hard to follow such an interesting, fascinating previous session with a lot of science. I don't have any data to show you today. Yeah. So, but one of the things that before I'll go into my current position and things how we're thinking about translation, things that we can do together. Vish asked me a little bit to go over my journey, and I think, as you mentioned, it's a little bit interesting as I have been doing various different roles in 20 plus years in academia, but in drug discovery, co-founding companies, and for the last 3 years at Novo Nordisk in large pharma. And one of the interesting things, before I'll do short about this, but one of the interesting things as I'm looking at the session and just thinking to myself in the company that one interesting thing is that we are at Novo Nordisk, the company among the big pharma that have the least external innovation contributing to our revenue. So probably, many of you can understand that because this has been a company that has done a lot internally, and this is what I driving now, the internal pipeline, but definitely we're changing how we're looking at external innovation and things that we need to do together. We understand and we're making a lot of changes over the last few years. But just say trivia, which one is the other company? Do you know which one is the other company that has the least external innovation contributing to the revenue? Eli Lilly, yes, exactly. I'm going to start. So again, as I said, Rich asked me about my own journey. That gives me quite an interesting perspective and background. And I'm going to start when I was 12 years of age. So don't worry, I'll go quick. I'll pass over really quick. But I need to say that because I always remember, I was a 12-year-old in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, growing up in a middle-class neighborhood called Barrio Once. And my father was a family physician, family doctor, and he had his office on the 7th floor of the apartment building. We live in the 8th floor of that same apartment, and he was he took appointments, but he also did without any appointments. You could just show up at his practice, and you can imagine he was very popular. And so you would come and just take a ticket and sit down and wait for your turn to get it. So my sister and I would come back from school, and of course we would go directly to that office, and it was a family business. My grandmother my mother were at the front office, and we would do our homework and then start helping him. And so soon I was, doing the rooming and the questioning for the patients and the blood pressure, taking the blood pressure, and sometimes even doing the EKGs. So then of course, that's how, my journey started. I decided I was going to be in medicine, that was my future, that I was going to get the best possible training that I could get, and then do an office in the same way that my father had. And his day would finish. His day would finish around 9 p.m. typically, and we would all go upstairs. We were in the cell. We would go upstairs and have dinner, and we just talk about the histories of the patients that happened that day. So talking about personalized medicine, that's really, we were part of the families of all those patients. We knew the families. We knew, much more than just what was happening to them. So really fast forward, I was lucky to get a training. I came to the US, I worked at the Mayo Clinic, I did my residency training in pediatrics, and I was gonna be a pediatric cardiologist, and I was gonna go back and have my office like my father. But of course, you can do all the plans you want in your life, but the reality always changes you and presents with things that you are completely unexpected. And that's how I changed and became passionate about research, which I know, and particularly understanding how liver gets injured and how it gets repaired. It's an organ that can regenerate, as most of you know. We take 2/3 of the liver, and then with the third that is remaining, you can recover the rest of the liver. So I get fascinated to understand those mechanisms. I got some amazing mentors. And there you go, I was just applying for faculty positions to stay in the US and be able to do more research, be able to get the grants. So I was lucky at that time, it wasn't that difficult. And so I got some really good funding early on. And soon enough, in my first faculty position at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, I get to some really interesting results on a biomarker that was a very strong biomarker predicting of liver injury. That was, a very significant unmet need for us. And I have a colleague that told me you should patent this finding. I didn't even know what he meant at that point. I was really concentrated on as a physician, as a doctor, and the research. I was completely unaware of the technology transfer office, and that was my first back in 2005, my first interaction with innovation and technology. So that's, we started and we were lucky, we got a number of patents, and my relationship with the innovation patent office were
quite prolonged, and we actually out-licensed our first technology. But it was a struggle. We can talk, and I think this morning I wasn't present, but there's a lot of issues when you are just doing this type of, just going with your innovation and patent and then look for out-license that technology. But I was lucky enough that I was recruited to San Diego to be to direct the division of liver and GI nutrition here at Grady. So back in 2011, I moved here, and then is when I started saying, I'm gonna, instead of doing that, I'm gonna take these things that are happening in the lab and try to move them into potential practical innovations myself. And so with really strong colleagues, I started learning how to do that. And a lot of trial and error, but I'm gonna tell you one of the stories, which is related to the inflammasome biology, which my lab was one of the first labs working around this particular important complex in inflammation. We have some really interesting biology, and all of a sudden we have a couple of venture capital groups that come into the lab to discuss potential starting a company. And I was lucky enough to hold on that and started doing more networking and get to work with a group of folks that were leading a biotech company that was in advanced conversations to be acquired by Big Pharma. And so they were thinking of the next act. And so we have once a month meetings that we would go together and we would work about the project, how we would do it. We established, the strategy, and so we have a very strong fundamentals. We have a very strong biology from years in the lab. We have a good human-centric evidence. We have a very good API strategy, how we were going to go after this target. What is the approach? We have the in vitro, the ex vivo, the in vivo approach that we were going to take for the pharmacology, for the validation of the target. We even developed a biomarker strategy, how we were going to do the target engagement and biomarker and a PD marker and biomarker of mechanisms. And we have an idea as a physician of what would be a good early clinical development plan. So with all those things, and I think back now in my position that routinely I'm sitting down with various companies, we were pre-seed, we didn't have funding at that time, we have more things that a lot of the companies that I see routinely and talk that they're much more advanced, and they have maybe even Series A funding and much more mature. But this was a really perfect scenario of how you create a group that comes together and creates something new from scratch. And so we had very quickly got seed funding, and we started at the J Labs in Torrey Pines. That we were one of the first cohorts of companies. It's a highly successful incubator, and this was 2015. In a matter of 2 years, we went from there to having one of our programs that were in the process of getting into the pre-IND, the preclinical activities to get the program into the clinics. And we started getting attention from Big Pharma, and that, as I will show you here, this is a little bit of the trick for biotechs that are getting success. When to start collaborating with large pharma. For us, there was momentum, and the company ended up being acquired by Roche, by Genentech Roche, and the group sort of dispersed. And then is when I started collaborating with Novo Nordisk. They were interested in the inflammasome biology, and they came late to the discussion with our company, and so we started collaborating. And the pandemic hit, this was right 2020. So I started and moved with them first as an advisor, and for the last 2 years, I'm running in the R&D department. I run the therapeutic areas for liver and kidney disease for the early pipeline. So we take the targets after the ideation, when they come out, we validate, mature the targets all the way up to phase 1B. That's, as I mentioned, a quick fast forward. That's takes me to my current role. And as I mentioned, our company is a company that has done a lot internally that, and we recognize this, but we are expanding. We are going through a massive expansion. We are looking at novel modalities. We have largely focused on peptides, antibodies, and now we're looking at a whole spectrum of different modalities of how to drug specific targets. We are expanding in indications. And so we are really looking at how to identify external innovation, how to partner with key companies that are having, potential transformational, innovative ideas. And this slide, I think this group knows very well. There's a lot of issues when you're trying to go early and help with an idea into a practical innovation. The things have not moved that much. Of course, we have heard through this previous session this morning, the technology has enabled us to give us a lot more opportunities, ability to translate, but still we keep seeing when we look back and we look at statistics, we have pretty much unable to move the needle that less than 10% of the programs that are started in the clinics go all the way through and are approved. And much more daunting is when we look at the preclinical pipeline. You reach 2/3 of that don't ever see the clinics. And the cost of doing all this continues to rise. So we need to focus and see how we can help. And this shows, the challenges that we have in front of us. It is a very winding and treacherous road to get from a scientific idea all the way to a product. And as we heard, even those in the previous session, even when products the regulators get to agree, many times the market doesn't accept it. It's not the right, so even after going through all these hurdles, getting a phase 3 trial approved, sometimes the commercial need is not there and the product ends up dying after regulatory approval. So for us at Novo and in general in pharma, we have been really good at the site at partnering when we have a late preclinical or a clinical asset that is promising, and it makes sense because we are the best partners at that point. We have unique expertise to conduct these massive, every time more complicated trials, multi-center, international, large number of patients, and pharma has unique expertise and capabilities to do that, to work with regulators and get the right endpoints and what is needed to get a drug approved. And of course, after commercial, we have a very unique power to get to the patients that need this medication. So that is obviously the space that we have been, very successful. What pharma in general has been not that successful, where we go to the other extreme of the translation equation, where we get from academia, from other sources, a new idea that can be a potential significant practical innovation. We definitely have not been the best partners in that space. One of the things in my new responsibility that we have done is we needed to reassess 4 or 5 of these very large academic collaborations that we had, multi-year, large funding academic collaborations that Novo had, mostly with European centers, some of the top academic centers in Europe, and the statistics were very daunting. We saw that from all these multi-year collaborations, the contribution to our pipeline were basically zero. We have none of these. There were a lot of value that were added, publications, maybe new essays, and better understanding of the disease, etc. But for the bottom line, as a company, what we're looking is our pipeline, and what patients are expecting from us is to come with new medicines. And so from that, it was a zero. So we really need to look at other ways, and there are many. One I mentioned in the previous Q&A that we just signed with the Broad Institute. It's a very different academic collaboration that we can go over during the questions. But we need to be more innovative. We need to find new ways of interacting with academics. And then, of course, once you start and you have some funding, either government or non-government funding, some seed funding, now there's a number of incubators, accelerators that are really helping as a bridge. Usually, we heard in the previous session with the technology transfer group saying, if you get a 50 million investment, go for it. Yes. That's absolutely, I totally agree with that. But it's very hard. And for an academic to get, there's a whole, as academics, we don't realize, sometimes we get a potential transformational idea, the science is sound, but from that to an innovation, to something that can look like a product that can be developed, there is a really seed that needs a lot of things that typically we don't have in the academic setting. So really these accelerators and incubators have done a great job, and we're looking how we can, and I'll show you some of the initiatives, and I really want that part to be a conversation and hear your thoughts. We also are looking at innovative ways. We work very close, and I was just a few weeks ago at the largest at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, and we work very close with venture capital, and we're looking at, in that case, a more mature technologies or targets, programs that we can partner. We're looking at a number of ways, innovative ways that we can collaborate and contribute to the progress. And there's various models like the build to buy or adopted partnership and milestone dependent models that are quite different, and we can discuss about that. So within Novo, and here I'm showing, as Vish has said, we have two different sites. One is the Bio-Innovation Hub, which is in Boston, and I don't know if I mentioned, but I spend most of my time between Denmark and Boston. I still live in San Diego, but I spend most of my time in those two cities. But what I brought today here, I think for this audience, is more, we have a number of collaborations with the Novo Nordisk Foundation. The Novo Nordisk Foundation is our majority owner, and it has, and we work together with the company to really support academia and support entrepreneurship at the earlier stages. And so we have a number of very interesting programs, and we're just really under my leadership, we're now reviewing and expanding, reviving, and going further and expanding. As you will see, I won't have time to go over a number of them. Some of them are quite similar to some of the accelerator programs that you heard about, but they are really focused in Europe, and they're focused in Denmark and the Nordic region. And so we want to be more global, and that's where we're going. So in fact, we are having a workshop coming next month in Copenhagen, where we're going to be discussing these issues.
and we're going to have results of surveys that we have collected regarding these different accelerators and mentorship programs that we have ongoing, and we're going to come up with new recommendations to our CEO and the CEO of the Novo Nordisk Foundation for new initiatives. So this is here where I left it blank, because I think and I would like to get your input and conversation of what are the type of things that can help and how you see the problems that as you're trying to build it and think about creating and taking your science into a real practical innovation. So with that, thanks for listening.
So let me now invite Dr. Emir Sandhu. You want to come up?
Great, thanks. Great to be here in sunny Southern California. Actually, fun fact, I was born just up the road, but I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we moved when I was 1. So I don't really remember living here, but it is as beautiful as the day is today. It's a little painful to think what my Februarys could have been like, having grown up in Pennsylvania. But again, thanks for the invitation to be here, Vish. What I'll try to accomplish is sort of 3 topics today. The first is to tell you a little bit about Sandbox and the venture funds that we manage. The second is to go over case studies of how we've helped startups commercialize with payers. We work very closely with payers, we'll discuss. Payers being health insurers. And then lastly, Vish asked me to include a little bit on myself and my path potential, which I'll weave in a bit later. Maybe before I start, it'd be helpful for me just to get a sense of who's in the room. So if you're an entrepreneur, work with startups, whether as an advisor or an investor, if you could raise your hand, that would just be helpful for me to see. Okay, so most of them. Okay, great. All right. So
I guess I can advance it like how PDF goes on projection.
yeah, that's fine. So you may or may not have heard of Sandbox. Some of that may be, I guess, a consequence of being kind of a closed ecosystem. So Sandbox is the venture capital fund, the venture capital firm which manages the Blue Cross Blue Shield Venture Fund. So you've probably heard of the Blues. And for the last 15, now almost 16 years, we have been working with the payers across the country, Blue plans, and managing the Blue Venture Fund. And we're now working more closely with hospital systems as well that are interested in helping their startups commercialize and work more closely with payers. So more on that in a second. Here's a little bit of high-level information on the funds. As I mentioned, the first fund was in 2008. We just closed on Fund 5 within the last year. And some key things that I'll mention here is we manage about 1.2 to 1.3 billion on behalf of 33 to 34 Blue plans across the country. The one holdout, people ask that, the one holdout is Mississippi. But in this state, we work with Blue Shield of California and Anthem, now called Elevance, have been great partners. If you put those Blue plans together, they cover about 110 million lives, so about 1 in 3 in the US. And other stats that people ask about, so we're stage agnostic. We invest up to about 20 million over the life of a company, depending on exactly what they do. And we invest in 3 main areas. The first are healthcare service companies or digital health companies. The second, enterprise software, health IT. And then lastly, clinical or med tech innovations that actually touch the practice of medicine and a group like CLIA or the FDA would regulate. Bear with me, there's no arrow here, so I'm dragging it. There we go. And so here's a slide that details how the model works and the impact over the last 15 years. And maybe before I get into this, I'll just start with an observation, which is that I think a lot of startups have a good sense of what they need to seek regulatory approval, what the steps are to work with the FDA. And where I see maybe more challenges are who's going to pay for this, or how do I get reimbursement? And that's what we help with. So here are some stats, but if you look at Blue Plans and you look at our portfolio of companies, Blue Plans syndicate about $2.3 billion in annual recurring revenue to the companies that we've invested in. And about, I think it's 97% of plans have worked with a company in the portfolio. And we're really proud of these stats because we think it speaks to the fact that we're investing in companies that actually address problems and challenges for plans that are out there. And this is where I'll start to weave in kind of my path to venture. So I started my life kind of on the physician path, and as I had mentioned, grew up in Pittsburgh. Wanted to become the orthopedic surgeon for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was probably my dream if you asked me 15 or 20 years ago. Was in med school, and that was around the time the Affordable Care Act was being passed, and I was just curious about how healthcare would change and what the impact would be, and that kind of sparked this interest in learning a little bit more, and so I did an MBA, and while I was there, I kind of intended to study more about the path of becoming a hospital administrator. And when I was there, I got involved in helping to start a company actually in the microbiome space, as a few of the previous speakers were talking about, and kind of caught the bug and loved this idea of working with entrepreneurs, and learned about venture capital in my coursework. And I thought, what a cool job. That would be a really nice fit. And so graduated from med school and business school, decided to finish my medical training, went out to Stanford to do my residency in radiology. That's what brought me out to the Bay Area, and it's been 10 years now. And I was chatting with Aaron during the break, completely finished residency and then made the total left turn of becoming a fully residency trained doc and then going to finance the next day, which I love. I've really enjoyed learning about startups, as I mentioned, about how they're financed. And then for me, a really special thing that I've enjoyed learning is actually how the payer system works, how you actually can work with payers. And that was not a part of my training when I was in the hospital side of things. And, understanding how the payers think has been something that I've really enjoyed learning more about. This is the rest of our healthcare team. There are about 30 of us, which, is a pretty lean team to be working with all those companies and Blue Plans. And so I'll share a little bit of the secret sauce of how we actually get stuff done, which is some of these advisory groups. So each one of these bubbles represents an advisory group that we have with Blue Plans. So the clinical advisory group on the far left was the first advisory group. And so that is all of the chief medical officers across the Blue system. And you can fill in the appropriate blank as you go further right. So all the chief pharmacy officers are in the pharmacy group. This is a really powerful tool for a number of reasons. One, it helps plans learn from each other. And so when they're working with a startup, they can highlight what's worked at that particular plan with that startup, and it kind of creates a lot of fast followers. The other thing is we'll take interesting innovations and ideas and actually present it to decision makers and people who have the authority to pilot at these plans. And so we've seen a lot of contracts come out of these groups, and it's really helped helped us make better investments. So this is one of the ways that we actually get a lot done, despite only having 30 folks on our investment team. This one is just kind of quick stats. I think this is probably familiar to most folks in the room. It's hard to secure venture capital funding as as Ariel mentioned. So these are our stats kind of over the last few years. I think it's probably trending toward 150 to 1 more recently. But we can get, I have a few market stats toward the end if there's time to get into that. And then I'll probably end here. This is just sort of a case study of how the model works in action. So HeartFlow is a company some of you may be familiar with. They're a more mature company at this point. They're a Stanford spin-out. Their roots are at the university there. And what they do is, if you've ever seen car commercials where they model the aerodynamics, that's somewhat akin to what they do with blood flow in the heart. So if you've heard of fractional flow reserve, FFR, they can do that via CT scan. And so the Blue Venture Fund invested in HeartFlow before they were FDA approved. It's an AI product, right? They're just looking at flow via CT scan instead of actually putting a catheter in the heart. So it's a totally revolutionary product. The fund invested before FDA approval, and I think a nice case study of how we've helped a company that is a little bit different but helps patients is we actually took them to a blue plan and a hospital system and actually studied over the course of 12 to 24 months what were the clinical outcomes, and then baked in the health economic study to that health economic outcomes to that study. Then took those outcomes and went across the country. You know, fast forward now, they have commercial coverage. I think 96% of commercial lives have coverage for this test. They're in some massive percentage of the top 100 hospitals. I think the American College of Cardiology just made them a Category 1 test for CAD last year. But you know, one thing we're proud of in the middle, they actually received private payer coverage before Medicare coverage, which is extremely rare. I think speaks nicely to the model and how working with payers at an earlier stage can really help you commercialize. So that's maybe one lesson here. Another is, you know, if you're considering raising funding and want to work more closely with payers, reach out. We're happy to help provide some advice and high-level guidance. And I'll maybe end it here because I do want this to be more of a dialogue, but hopefully gives you a flavor of our model. It's maybe a little bit different. We can write checks, but we also do a little bit more on actually helping companies commercialize and work with payers. But please ask questions. I'll stop right here and I'll hand it back to Vish.
Thank you, Evan. So we're going to open it up to Q&A now. So let's see, I'm going to give the mic here as well. But let me just jumpstart this with both of you. If I could have the mic here. So you mentioned, Emma, 150 to 1, 125 to 1. Like, what is that one? Can you tell us, like, what are some characteristics of that one? So we can be in that 1 rather than 150?
Sure, it's such a hard question. I actually have a slide later in this deck, but I can speak to it. I think a few tips and tricks that can best position yourself. So first of all, it's a fit both ways, right? So you really should get to know the funds themselves. And it sounds like sort of surface level advice, but like, get to know who at the fund you're speaking with. I can't tell you how many times, I'm a radiologist by background. I can't tell you how many times I've listened to pitches where people are telling me what an X-ray is or what ultrasound is. So check out both the individual and other companies that a fund has invested in. So there was a company, a different Stanford spin out, but I thought they had a really nice approach where they're an AI-based technology and they worked backwards. So they looked at HeartFlow as kind of an aspirational company. And so they said, if someone was interested in investing in HeartFlow, they might be interested in investing in us. And so they reached out to those funds first. And it actually worked for them. They got a term sheet. They had, I think, 3 investors coming to a seed round, and they're off to a really great start. So do your homework, be well prepared, create a targeted list. And then in this environment, I think one other thing that I've seen work well is just, it's hard to raise capital. It's always hard to raise capital. It's been especially challenging over the last year. If you can show that you can be capital efficient in hitting your milestones, that I think will go doubly far now as it has in years past. But those are just a couple of tips. They may sound superficial, but I do believe they actually shine through when you see it. If there are specific questions that you all have, I'm happy to take them afterwards too.
I have a quick question on this. When you come in with your investment, and for example, in this, did they have to go through having the 510K FDA approval for the utilization of their test before you invested?
So we invested before.
Before the
Correct.
FDA? Did you assist them in preparing for getting the test ready for the FDA approval or not? Or was this way before that?
In this case, I think they were getting close to submitting, so they had done a lot of studies, and there was really good data. What was unique about HeartFlow is that they were really one of the first, if not the first, kind of AI-enabled diagnostic to get approval. So we did certainly help, but I think they, at that point, had a significant database that they were submitting as part of their dossier.
Hi, I have two questions, one for each of you. The first question from here, so just to introduce myself, Dr. Stephen Moyo, CEO and founder of a company called Wealthy. We're a health equity platform and really building tools for what we call the value-based care workforce, really focusing on Medicaid. So you mentioned those are two of the advisory groups that you have. I guess my question with respects to that is across the 30 to 34 groups, how rapidly are they investing into the value-based care space? And kind of what is the timeline? And what I mean by that is the value-based care space is growing. I think it's finally coming into its own. I think the writing's on the wall that this is where we're moving. But as you think about investments in the space, are you looking for ROI within a year on this, or is it more towards as the plans start to actually shift over the next sort of 5 years? How does that look like for you guys from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, great question. So the first part, value-based care, is certainly front and center of what we do and what we think about. Not everything we do is value-based care, but it's becoming part of our bread and butter. And it's an area that we can really help companies, just given who we work with. One, in terms of like the BD opportunities, right, with big payers, and I can share some examples if it's helpful. But also just even the contracting. One of my colleagues is a gentleman named Mark Bartlett, who is the CFO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, which is a single state plan. It's a huge plan. What he's helped us do for companies in the portfolio is actually build out what we call a contract readiness discipline. And so it's basically like a scorecard of if you get stuck contracting in something that is more of a value orientation or a value-based contract. It's probably one of these 10 areas, and these are the 10 things that you need to have to actually get a contract done. So we understand that it takes time. Like it's very difficult to go from PowerPoint to huge upside downside risk overnight. So back to your point of ROI, we certainly realize it takes time and to one, get the contract, and then two, to demonstrate that it's actually delivering better outcomes, more cost efficient, delivering on the triple or quadruple aim. It's hard to pinpoint an exact date, where you want the ROI, but certainly realize that those contracts take more time than say something that, might be like a GLP-1 where, it gets approved and there's a huge value inflection point there.
Awesome. And then my second question for Ariel, as you guys think about clinical trials, the FDA recently, I think for both pharma and medical devices, now requiring community-based participatory research. Are you guys planning for that? How are you strategizing around that aspect for drug delivery or development? Excuse me.
I don't think that's a good question. I don't think I'm the right person to give you, that's on our clinical development folds and, medical science, medical side. So I ask absolutely, things that we hear, but it's not something that, I would be able to give you a lot of specifics. I don't know if maybe you are more
Could you
involved.
repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was around community-based participatory research. So it's clinical, there are a few companies that I know are doing clinical trial platforms, they're pretty common, but FDA, federal government is now requiring pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies to do community-based participatory research, which means you go into communities that are underserved and actually work with them to do clinical research. So increasing equity in research is the goal.
Okay.
And so I'm just wondering if his company is actually doing this, how their strategies are. I think Moderna, for example, has announced a strategy around it, and other companies have, so I'm curious.
Interesting. I've heard a little bit about it. We're not pharma investors, so it's just a different scope. Certainly our diagnostic and device companies are probably thinking about that though.
Question there. Yeah, maybe.
I'll speak up on the last statement you just said. So when you have companies that's like medical device companies that you invest in, they're mostly in like a hospital setting, but going off what he just, the question he asked, and you need to involve the community, do you invest in organizations and companies that have medical devices that can be used mostly outside of the hospital setting as a way to connect further with patients, or that's not in the hospital system, but still you can get a reimbursement from outside of the hospital. And a part of that is, what would be more valuable in that situation? Working with them in a pilot or still working on getting FDA approval? I don't know if you understand the question I'm asking in a sense.
Sure. So yes, we definitely do invest. That would be in scope. And so particularly in like the home setting, right? So even one step beyond outpatient, I would consider like home setting where you're really increasing access. That is definitely in scope. We've looked at a number of kind of home-based diagnostics, whether they're blood tests or home-based urine tests. In the early days, before I joined the fund, there was a home-based lab diagnostic that they invested in. We've looked at a bunch more recently that one interesting one that actually used, it was an entrepreneur who came from a family that had a big lab business and realized that the camera on a cell phone actually had a lot of similarities to a lab analyzer and built a pretty interesting company. It was called Scanwell. I think Beckman Dickinson acquired it over the last couple of years. So probably wish that we had made that investment, but that was probably the closest we came. So to the first part of your question, yes, that is in scope. And I just want to make sure I'm answering the second part of your question. Do you mind repeating it?
All right, so with that in mind, if you would be interested in working with a company that works outside the hospital, but still like the information will be useful to a payer system like Blues, what would you find more important if they were able to do a pilot or if they got FDA approval? Because that's the chicken and egg situation, like you need one for the other. You need the FDA approval to probably do a pilot, or you need a pilot to try to get FDA approval. So which would you consider a person trying to shoot for first if they were going to that approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that chicken and egg dynamic is something we think about a lot in how we can actually help solve it, since we work with obviously the payers. I think if you can actually bring both sides of that payer-provider equation into a pilot, so say you get a pilot with a provider, which tends to happen a little bit easier for devices. If you can say, hey, this is the pilot that we have structured, And this is the biggest payer that they work with, or this, they have the strongest relationship with XYZ payer, and pull them into that pilot, that can be pretty powerful, and is kind of similar to what we talked about with Heartflow here. That being said, not every payer is going to join in a pilot, right? Many of them will want to wait to see what the clinical outcomes are first. And so it ultimately is going to be more of a case by case, which payer, which group, like what the specific area of need is for them to actually join a pilot or not. But in terms of what's going to maximize your success of actually getting a payer in a pilot, I think by far the best thing you could do is say, this is the provider that is sponsoring the pilot with us. And we'd love to include you in your thoughts and think about what outcomes you would want to see as part of this study. So that's how I would, that's how we generally advise folks to go about it.
Thank you.
I have a kind of weird specific question and then a more general question. You mentioned that you really prioritize those who have ways to reduce costs. What are the most common places where you can reduce costs, whether it's from the discovery in the lab to the endpoint goal, anywhere in between? And then I have a specific one about clinical trials. So this is maybe beyond what you know about, but I'm just curious for cutting costs is if you have found something in the lab that is already in trials for something completely different, is there a way to save costs by adding on to those clinical trials to look at a different metric or measurement? And is that attractive? Is that worthy enough? Or not? How valuable is that to be able to sort of, and how feasible is that to be able to already jump on or piggyback, so to speak, on existing clinical trials?
I can answer the second part a little bit because it's interesting. That's actually what we're doing, and it's interesting because that's how we found that the GLPs have a weight loss effect. We're doing the trial on liraglutide for type 2 diabetes, and by the way, patients were losing quite a bit of weight. So one of my colleagues and esteemed Lore Knudsen, who that was in the team at that time, noticed this, and there was a lot of resistance to do a trial on weight loss. At that time there was, so it was not really a market, and it was sort of like a graveyard obesity. So absolutely, and that's pretty much how we have been expanding since then. And we're seeing that once we have better molecules like SEMA and higher doses, we see that it goes into other tissues and has other effects apart from what we know in appetite and insulin release. And so we are adding, so we have large studies in chronic kidney disease, in NASH, etc. We have a very large study on Alzheimer's. So definitely that is the way of amplifying when you have a molecule like that has so many positive and good biologies that are affecting multiple biologies. Yes, you want to multiply and take the most of advantage. So that's really a fascinating story for the weight loss part of it.
Something like that. Do you know the recent joke from Jimmy Kimmel about Novo Nordisk? People are losing so much weight on Ozempic. Now to reverse the weight loss, they are introducing a new drug called Ozempic, which will be weight gain, So anyways, you talked about external innovation as a model, which pharma has embraced. Many other companies, except Novo and Lilly, have been more conservative. Ironically, these two companies have now done the best. If I'm at Pfizer, I should be wondering whether I should be doing external innovation at all. So there's that question. But coming back to what you're trying to do in external innovation, which is collaborating with innovators outside the company, right? Not just R&D, what's called C&D, connect and develop, right? not just research and develop. How do you get the word out to the rest of the world that we are looking for these areas? Maybe hearing loss is of interest to us, going back to Uri's area. How do you get the word out? How do people get to know that Novo Nordisk would be a good partner for them to talk to?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it has been, so one of the things is interesting to the first part of your question or comment. It is a balance of staying focused and at the same time expanding. So it seems opposing. We need to expand and we are going into different indications, but still staying focused in the areas that we think we can really contribute. And that is on the, we call the cardiometabolic space. So obesity, diabetes, heart disease, kidney, and liver disease. So we are, compared to our to the other pharma, very much still very focused on specific areas. We are trying early on. It has been a very significant challenge because there was very limited innovation, very limited VC activity around those areas. Very little about obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular. So we really needed to find ways to collaborate with investors and with academia to put the seeds that these are areas that are of significant needs. Of course, for the last year, things have been changing. In the last JP Morgan, we have a lot of companies coming to us with potential obesity solutions, of course. So those are things that have been taken out of their drawers and old stuff, and not a lot of exciting stuff. So we need to push innovation. There's a lot of great minds that needs to come. We show that there's a significant market out there, so we're expecting that there's going to be huge in the coming years, a lot of opportunities. We are doing a number of activities to go to the early, as I showed in that, to go to the very early stages of translation innovation. And so we're hoping to become more global, more involved on at the global scale, helping support entrepreneurs and potential transformative. The research is very clear. We see it. Transformative, disruptive innovations typically occur in small groups. Even individual researchers are more likely to come up with disruptive technologies or novel biologies. And so we really need to go where we really need to partner and where those things are happening.
Great. One more question here.
One more.
Okay, sorry, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I was going to speak to your talk. He had mentioned the 70s, and one of them was deployed. So when I look at your timeline here, HeartFlow got an initial investment, and then now it's at 96%. So I'm just wondering if we could drill down a little bit, how does the sandbox or is it the DBF help the companies, your portfolio companies deploy? Is it potentially through those groups that you mentioned or some other mechanism, or even at all? Is it just like part of that value for your companies?
Yeah, this is a good one, and one we're really proud of because it's, I think, delivering a lot of good patient outcomes, right? The cardiologists made it their category 1 test, as I mentioned, and the way we've helped them over the years has really been working hand in hand with the payers to actually ensure that a quality test like this is getting coverage. Because, I think there are two big hurdles in the evolution of a device or diagnostic company. There are a bunch more than that, but the big ones are, does it work? And will someone pay for it? And the does it work question is the FDA question, right? And then I think even bigger question is like, will people use it and will someone actually cover it? And so that's where we've helped them over the years. So Campbell Rogers, their chief medical officer, has presented to our advisory groups, to the chief medical officers across the system, has presented to the chief financial officers. They actually just released a new product that's more of a planning tool and plaque analysis tool. And we're working with them again, hand in hand, to actually get that out into cardiologist hands so that they can actually use it and Harplo can actually commercialize that product. If that's directionally where you wanted me to go, I
Yeah,
can get
no,
more
exactly.
specific.
So when it comes from the CMO of your healthcare system, as an ambassador to the product, then the end user clinicians are more inclined to use the product.
Yeah, I think they ultimately have to do two things in parallel. So the first is they've conducted dozens upon dozens of studies, maybe even up over 100. And so they've created a base of evidence that gets the cardiologist comfortable actually using and recommending a test. And then in parallel, you have to work with the payers because back to the chicken and egg question, you need both sides. And so historically, where we've been able to be really helpful is on the payer side. And I think now there's more evidence of hospital systems wanting to collaborate with payers, thinking about how can we actually solve this chicken and egg problem together to make innovation actually work for everybody.
So I think we all agree that everything we do is to improve patient outcome. And so we keep coming up with these new devices that detect the disease earlier or treatments that treat it better. But now we've reached a point that we've added so much of testing and so much of treatment cost to it that now we're starting to think, how can we make it cheaper? And so two things we focus on: improve outcome, but also reduce cost. So all of the things that we propose to do doing this, and I mean, this is for you, is through a device or through something that we have control over that we can sell to somebody else to use. But what about measures that don't include a device? So just to give you an example, so preventive measures in a way, things like we treat infections, yes, but what about a focus on preventing those infections or identifying people who are more prone to getting those infections and focusing on that? And since your payers are these health insurance companies, they will see the benefit right away. You invest more money in detecting these infections earlier or preventing them, and you see the sort of the benefit to your bottom line right away. I mean, for insurance companies to do this, or health insurance companies, they didn't see that benefit, so they didn't see that benefit right away, so they didn't put that money into this. Like Kaiser's different. Kaiser sells their own insurance and then provides their own care. So they are a lot more focused on prevention than any other health insurance company is. But how can we propose something that we can get funding for to implement these things, these kind of things?
Yeah, good question. It reminds me, so when I was either first or second year med student, there was a lecture, I think it may have been a diabetes focused lecture, and the talk was about a novel compound that can maybe improve A1C by that much. It was certainly nothing like, as impactful as the drugs you're working on. And then at the end of the talk, the lecturer got up and was like, yeah, I mean, it's nice that we can improve A1C by that much, but the problem is like half the patients don't even take their meds. And so to your point, like there are bigger picture questions and innovations. And so that's why we're actually one of the few funds out there that invest across the spectrum in not just device or life science. It's also the service innovations, the IT innovations, because we think it takes that whole spectrum to actually deliver on the triple or quadruple, I've even heard quintuple aim now. So at a high level, I do want to make that point. The second part of your question was how can an innovator actually work with payers, both integrated delivery networks and more standalone payers to actually get traction with what sounds like more of like a risk score preventive measures. And like those things are definitely of interest. I think it probably goes back to a previous question that I answered, which was if you can show that clinicians are using a product or a test or a score, and you can show some early data, it doesn't have to be dozens and dozens of studies, but if you can show that it's getting some use, it's really powerful to show that and say, hey, clinicians in your network are using this test. And then go to most hospital systems will have 3 or 4 major payers, and then there'll be a longer tail of others. But then go to one of those big payers and ask to actually work on something together in conjunction with the provider partnerships that you have. So I've seen that work well for a number of both portfolio companies and companies that we've talked to. It's certainly more powerful to go in with a provider than to just go in with an idea. I've seen that work better, just from my limited experience.
Oh, that's helpful, thank you. It was, what we tried is going to the hospital and presenting this, and they're not interested.
Okay, the hospital.
Yes.
This is actually just kind of following up on this because I think it's interesting. You mentioned hospitals and you mentioned kind of the clinician, right, which still revolves around a sort of sick care system, which is if we're trying to create value, right, in this value-based care system, and we're still actually relying on the doctor to be a vehicle of that, we don't see patients until they're sick, right? And so I think another way to frame the question is do you see the Blues, the health insurance plans, your firm, actually investing in true prevention, which happens upstream, education, public health, et cetera, and not so much around early diagnostics, improve efficiencies around a sick care system?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at some of the first wave of value-based care companies like that, you may have heard of Aledade, right? And so the founder and CEO there has a line that it's you have to give me a second here, but I think his line is that you get paid more to treat a stroke than to prevent a stroke, right? Which the first time I heard, I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy, but it is. I think he's right in the current system. But Alade's a nice example, and like this first wave of value-based care companies are definitely trying to tackle that. And there's been a lot of both investment from health insurers into value-based care startups or in-house programs, and then contracted directly with those companies too. So it's kind of both sides, investing in and then actually working with those companies. So definitely, I think there's a real eagerness to actually move prevention and move kind of outcome-based care further.
I just want to close this with one comment here because we want to just go into a break. But before that, Walter, you have a comment or question? Can you get the mic to Walter?
Yeah, let me just stand up. I'm glad you touched on some of these really difficult kind of challenging questions. One of them is behavioral care. And just curious what your thoughts are about behavioral care, because this is an area that may not be a huge expense, but it's really a challenge to deliver expert, effective treatments.
It's definitely an area that is hugely important, and we can chat about a few different ways we measure that. So one is behavioral health blends into other areas. It's very difficult to discretely say this is just VH cost and siloed, right? It can affect what's more conventionally called medical expenditure, right? That's pretty well demonstrated and documented. And so we made a number of investments. It's probably the area we've invested in the most. If you looked at all the domains of medicine, probably behavioral health. And so huge area of need. And then access continues to be a problem, right? So finding clinicians who are both in network and actually have space available for your patients is a huge challenge. And so we've invested in a number of companies in behavioral health over the years. One called Able To, a few that are in the treatment for opioid use disorder, and then some that are in measurement-based care. But if you were to really take a broad lens at BH, that's probably the area where we've made the most investments. It's hugely, hugely important.
Okay, so I want to close with one question for Ariel, since you know UCSD well, and in our quest to first become Boston and then beat Boston, you know, what should we do differently, better, when you look at, you interact with the other Boston-based universities, what should we be doing better? There are a number of resource ecosystem players here, so just to get some feedback.
We have another half an hour. But no, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here. I always seen I've been here for over a decade. I think one thing that comes, I mean, we have, you know, that is that there's a lot of very smart individuals here doing individual efforts. There's much limited collective getting together and doing collective efforts towards you know, a goal. So I think that's type of things that you are doing with this, you know, getting together are key. So but I think this the secret sauce is there. There's a need for better implementation, better coordination, have the operational way of getting people together. But definitely you have all the condiments to do it. And so we have, so anyway, hopefully I close with a very
Does
positive.
Boston do it well?
What's that again?
Does Boston do it well?
Boston does it really well, yes, despite all the issues that, but it does it really well. So, but do we have another hour to this depending, you know, so, but Kendall Square does it really well, and certain areas they do it really well. So all it's also that there's a lot of things that we could implement and learn. But I think we're on their way, and
Yeah.
you know, these type of events are really helping, you know, bringing people together. So.
Thank you, Ariel. I remember back in the 80s when I was a grad student, Kendall Square was not a place you went to when you get mugged. And now it's completely been transformed. And so hopefully we'll see that kind of transformation in this area in the coming decades. I want to thank our panelists here for being here. Let's give a big hand to everyone. We're going to take a quick break before our final panel on even more concrete resources that are available here, some funding grants, mentoring, support, and a new program is going to be announced here for company formation. So watch out for that.
Yes.